my name is Nick. He, him, his pronouns. I actually went to Georgetown as an undergrad, graduating from the SFS back in 2013 as an IPOL major. I have since then worked for the US government, worked on the financial regulatory side, and worked in consulting before coming back to my alma mater at Georgetown, and now I am the industry advisor for finance, consulting, and business. So if you have any questions about the finance sector, as well as consulting, or really any of the for-profit sectors, I'm happy to meet you one-on-one. You can also meet with any of our peer advisors who are juniors and seniors that have already gone through this process and can give you an even closer look in terms of the student experience going through finance recruiting. So why are we talking about finance now versus during your junior or senior year? Really, it's because the financial sector, unlike really every other sector of the economy, starts much earlier in terms of the recruiting process. So while the main internship is during the summer between your junior and your senior year, you start the recruiting process over a year early. So the recruiting process starts really now. So this would be the winter, spring of your sophomore year. This will kick off the next 3 to 5 months of going to info sessions, submitting your applications, networking, going through initial screening interviews, and then going to super day interviews, and hopefully getting an internship offer out of that process. And we'll walk through all of that sort of piece by piece over the next few slides. So really for what we'll call core finance, and I'll get into in a few minutes what that means. For core finance, you really do need to have an internship in the sector in order to get a full-time offer after you graduate your senior year. That makes finance different than many other sectors of the economy, including consulting, where you can do at least related internships and then get still a full-time job offer. For core finance, so your investment banks, private equity, venture capital, asset management firms, you really do need to have a relevant internship within that sector, within the core financial services sector, in order to eventually get a full-time job. But we'll also talk about some alternative options in case you're not directly interested in getting involved with only core financial services, but are interested in the broader ecosystem of financial services firms. Or if the internship process doesn't work out for you this go around, there are still opportunities in the broader financial services ecosystem. So while our presentation today is mostly focused on the sophomore recruiting process, for if you're a freshman and have joined, this is what the cycle will look like for you in a year. If you're a junior that has joined the call, there aren't that many opportunities still open, but given the disruption of the pandemic, there are some spots open for this summer for juniors that were not filled during this recruiting season last year. So it's still worthwhile looking on a Handshake for openings. So it's easy, particularly at Georgetown, to think that finance is one thing or one sector, which it isn't. Really, it is a bunch of sectors and subsectors, and then further divisions and roles within those subsectors. So even if you say, oh, I want to go into investment banking, that means a lot of different things. So we're going to break it down between types of divisions within firms, the type and size of those firms, the geographic location you might be working in either for your internship or your full-time job, and then functional job roles. And finally, it's the functional job roles, which will be the titles of the internships you're actually applying for on Handshake. So while this is not an exhaustive list, there are really 8 major divisions within most financial services firms. And this includes in what are called the bulge bracket investment banks. So for example, Bank of America is an investment bank, but it doesn't just do investment banking. It does commercial banking, it does retail banking, it does asset wealth management, etc. Retail banking is your standard. You go down the street and you have a savings account, checking account. You are a small business and are trying to get a loan, mortgage company for home mortgages, etc. So that is what would be called retail banking or personal banking. A lot of what you'll see on Handshake as in terms of job board will be in the commercial/corporate banking or investment banking category. So commercial and corporate banking, it is often the same banks that do retail banking to individuals and families, but instead is focused on lending and deposits for large companies and institutions. So each account has a lot more assets, a lot more money in it than your standard family or individual account. Investment banks, so what we hear a lot at Georgetown in terms of going into IB, is really focused on creating markets. So it's bringing together companies that are looking to find investors, companies that are looking to merge, acquisitions between companies. Investment banking is the side of the broader financial services ecosystem that brings those different organizations together. What are organizations that are looking to invest and organizations that have assets or ideas that they need investments in. But again, just because something is an investment bank doesn't mean they only do investment banking, because they do a lot of these other functions as well. Insurance, often an under-acknowledged part of the broader financial services industry, even though they end up controlling large portions in terms of asset values. Insurance also intersects with the risk analysis, ESG, and consulting sectors, as well as the tech sector, given the analysis and needed to determine where the likelihoods and costs of different types of events happening. So this is where you'd find firms like Aon. And then you'll hear somewhat less so in the broader Georgetown discussion frame, but definitely have some opportunities on Handshake and also opportunities that you'll see throughout the next few months, which is private equity, which is usually individuals that are high net worth pooling their assets, or large institutions like pension funds who are looking to make medium to long-term investments in more mature companies. That can be through either purchasing a company outright or a controlling share in a company. It is usually lower returns in terms of percentage, but an investment that's more long-term in nature. Venture capital, or VC, these are companies that are also known as angel investors. They will pool assets in order to invest in less mature, more startup-focused companies where there's a high growth potential, which also means the risk of failure is very high. Venture capital firms don't have that many internships open, though there are still a few. And venture capital is sort of the most newish in terms of offering internships versus the more traditional internships that are offered on the commercial banking and investment banking side. Hedge funds are even more quantitatively focused because of their analysis of short-term, high-return investments. These are mostly very advanced investors rather than pension funds or even your standard high net worth individuals. And then finally, asset and wealth management. You'll see either of these terms used, either asset management or wealth management. And effectively what you're doing in these roles, or what these divisions do, is to advise individuals, families, pension funds, companies, large institutions on how to use their money and their assets based on risk tolerance. And so within each of these divisions, you'll have different types of roles. which we'll talk about in a few minutes. The ones that are most well represented on Handshake that you'll see in terms of roles are commercial and corporate banking, investment banking, asset management, and retail banking, with sort of second tier in terms of representation on Handshake, again, which will be your go-to board for all of these internships and jobs. Second tier would be insurance, and then private equity, with there being some VC and hedge fund roles, but those much fewer roles than in the other divisions or sectors. And just as a reminder for folks that have joined since I mentioned, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and I will try to get to them as we go along, and if not, at the end of the presentation. And so if those are the different divisions within firms, what are the types of firms that you will see? Going from the far left, which are your bulge bracket firms, the world's largest investment banks and financial institutions in terms of the amounts of assets carried. So your Bank of America, Barclays, Citi, Goldman, Morgan Stanley, UBS. If it is a bank you've generally heard of in the broader public sphere, it is frequently a bulge bracket bank. Second down is middle market. So these are often focused on international regions rather than being worldwide, or focused on specific portfolios / are a little bit smaller in terms of total assets compared to the investment banks. These are Houlihan Lokey's, HSBC's, Jefferies, Mizuho, Royal Bank of Canada, Wells Fargo, etc. Then you'll see your boutique firms. So these focus on either specific sectors and or specific regions. And there is really as much opportunity for advancement and professional development in the boutique firms as there are in the middle market and bulge bracket firms. They're often, because the boutique firms are smaller, there are often less total internships, but there are also less applicants. So it is somewhat of a ratio playing game in terms of how many internships are there for how many applicants. And getting questions in the chat. So we will get to the question in terms of relevant or relative value and advancement potential of different divisions and sectors in a moment. And question about the possibility to transition between consulting to finance. So in the sort of real world career market, once you graduate, there's a lot of back and forth between the consulting and finance sectors. Within the environment of internships, it is much easier to do a finance internship and then go into consulting than it is to do a consulting internship and then go into finance, because of that sort of requirement that in order to get a finance full-time job, you need to have had a finance internship beforehand, rather than a consulting internship. But if you do a finance internship, you find it's not really your thing, you can do the consulting recruiting process in the fall, and definitely get a full-time consulting job. So it's more of a one-way direction during your internship search process while you're in college, but there's a lot of back and forth between the sectors that happen once you're actually in the full-time environment after you've graduated. And then other than boutique firms, you have your investment management firms. There's often a lot of cross-pollination between boutique investment management firms. These are your Bain Capitals, your BlackRocks. This is where you find a lot of the private equity, venture capital, hedge fund realm. Some of those divisions will also be present in the banks as well, depending on how the individual bank is structured. And then finally, some of the large insurance firms, your Allianz, your Aon, Progressive. We've probably all seen the Progressive commercials on YouTube. Your State Farm, your Blue Cross Blue Shield. So firms that we might think of Blue Cross Blue Shield, obviously more from a healthcare perspective, State Farm from more of a home auto insurance type perspective. But all of these are part of core finance, both from the networks they give you access to and the sheer magnitude of assets that they control and the investments that they make in order to drive returns that they can then turn into insurance payments out to their clients. So I mentioned earlier a little bit about the broader financial services ecosystem. It's easy to think of financial services as just the core organizations and banks, so these banks and these firms, but that is only a part of the broader financial services world. So if you're interested in finance, but also other things, or want to explore a broader set of types of internships and organizations, there are a few different directions you can go. So if you're interested in the intersection of finance and tech, fintech firms and startups, from an online banking perspective, from a crowdfunding perspective, from a payments perspective, some of these you will find on Handshake, but a lot of them on things like AngelList, Dice, sort of startup-focused job boards, and I will share those links and resources with all of you. If you're interested in the finance side of things, but also nonprofit or social impact, or if you're interested in nonprofit, but want to try and find somewhere where you can balance having that impact with having slightly higher compensation than you would at a pure nonprofit. One of the largest in terms of number of firms growing sectors within finance is social impact investing, also known as social investing. Those are your micro funders, your social finance organizations, public good companies. So some of these firms are true nonprofits, and some of them are public good firms, which effectively means that rather than emphasizing pure returns for their shareholders, they are emphasizing returns to the broader society, that they, whether that's at a city level, regional level, nation level, etc. So a good question is, would an internship at one of the non-core finance jobs enable you to get a full-time offer at a core finance bank? Yes and no. So if we are comparing different levels, in the full real world, as in outside of the artificiality of college with internships, then absolutely, yes. So I mentioned, I worked at the Department of Treasury for a while on the financial regulatory side, which is this next tier down in terms of financial regulators. And there is a lot of revolving door between the financial regulatory side and core finance, as there is with fintech and core finance, and increasingly social impact investing and core finance. That is very true within the full-time environment once you're a year or two out of school. In internships itself, it is very firm dependent, as in to what extent core finance firms consider internships in any of these organizations to be effectively a finance internship. In general, these are much more relevant than internships in completely non-finance sectors to sort of core finance roles. But it is very firm dependent just because of how new, particularly firms like fintech and social impact investing is. But these are also firms that give you a much broader swatch of experiences and help you build your network. So for some things, particularly for like fintech, social impact investing, you can sometimes be able to leverage those internships and those opportunities to build a more developed professional network than if you were just one of the cast of thousands that are in the incoming analyst class of Goldman Sachs, where you're going to have a real hard time differentiating yourself from all the other hundreds of interns and then hundreds of other first-year analysts at the firm. So it definitely is sort of a compare, contrast, pros and cons thing when contrasting these or comparing these with sort of core finance internships. Is it necessary to have a finance internship for this summer in order to get another internship next summer? No. So a lot of the firms do not offer internships for the summer of your sophomore year. Rather, you're going through the recruiting process now for the subsequent summer of 2023. And because you're submitting your applications over the next couple months, that'll be before any internships or activities you are doing this upcoming summer. That being said, if you already have an internship lined up for this summer, it is relevant to still put it on your resume in terms of experience you will have by the time you will be starting an actual finance internship in summer of 2023, and you can mark it as future or upcoming experience. And the last piece to note, which is actually the largest in terms of number of actual roles, is the whole huge world of corporate finance. So effectively, every single business, every single organization, whether it be Georgetown University or the Department of Defense, Amazon, Google, whomever, all need financial analysts. And so you will find, both in terms of internships and full-time roles, a lot of openings for finance analysts or financial analysts. Similar to what we were saying earlier, it is not a direct core finance to core finance role, but it gives you a lot of networking opportunities, particularly in terms of converting that into core finance roles 1 to 2 years out of school. So locations. Obviously, the go-to for most folks in the United States is New York. It's where most of the financial firms have their headquarters, or at least large offices. That being said, because New York is considered the go-to, there are a lot more people competing for these same opportunities in the New York office compared to every single other office of the same firm with the same division with the same role. So if you are trying to get an opportunity, lock down an internship that you can then convert into hopefully a full-time offer, it behooves you to apply for offices that are not New York, but are any of the other large financial centers within the US. So I'm marking here: Boston, DC, Chicago, San Francisco, LA. Various firms also have regional offices in Denver, in Seattle, and Dallas. Because those locations get less total applicants just because of the general allure of living in Manhattan, or at least working in Manhattan. You might have to live in Brooklyn or the Bronx. There ends up being a lot less competition for those roles, even if the experience you get will, at least from a resume perspective and a networking perspective, be the exact same. And in terms of outside of the US, so if you are a non-US citizen or are a US citizen that is interested in looking at some of the opportunities in the financial sector outside of the US, I've noted a number of the large international financial centers, so Toronto, London, Paris, Frankfurt, which are good options, particularly if you are an EU citizen, Paris and Frankfurt. London, given Brexit, it's unclear what that will mean longer term for financial internships in London-based finance firms, many of which have shifted their operations, or at least their official headquarters, to either Paris, Frankfurt, or just Western Europe in general. But those will all be things to look at individual firms and individual roles. Going further across the map, Dubai, large number of opportunities, particularly for Georgetown students. And then going further into Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia, in Beijing, Seoul, Tokyo, Shanghai, Hong Kong and Shenzhen, and Singapore. For each of these, you will need to look at the individual company and the individual opportunity to determine the companies enroll specific openness to sponsor visas, what sort of nationality or which nationalities the different roles are open to in order to analyze whether those opportunities are open to you. Of course, all of these financial centers also recruit from universities that are geographically closer to them, but some roles will be open to Georgetown students as well. In the international centers, should you know the native language? That is, of course, a definite plus. It depends on the specific firm. So larger firms, English, Mandarin, and French end up being the standards. For medium or smaller firms, there might be more of an expectation to speak either Korean, Japanese, Arabic, German, Cantonese for some firms. So it really depends, and most roles will note if there is a language requirement. The international center is also restricted to rising seniors for internships. It very much depends on the specific firm and the specific country. So outside of the US, many firms do their recruiting process junior year for that subsequent summer. So rather than doing it a year and a half in advance, they're only doing it 6 months in advance. So that is, it depends on the individual program, whether they will be open to you now. I mean, it is good if the program is both open to you, but you don't have to apply for it for another year, because that can help in that you can go through the application process this go round, see what outcomes you get in terms of getting an internship, and then for some of these programs be able to apply with the other non-US nationals during your officially junior year, even though all of those internships would actually start at the same time. But again, very firm dependent and office dependent. So if we've talked about divisions within firms, sizes and types of firms, offices, what are the actual roles that you can apply for, and what are the pluses and minuses of those different types of roles? So these is definitely not an exhaustive list, but these are the types of roles you most commonly see on lists of internships and entry-level jobs. So walking through each of these, comparing what your daily activities look like, what your weekly hours look like, your year one salary, out-of-pocket lifestyle expenses, which I'll explain, and what are some of the opportunities after year three at each of these firms. So banking, particularly investment banking, most of your daily activities as a year one, year two analyst, and you will be starting to get these opportunities and experiences during an internship. You're creating pitch books, you're developing financial models, you're gathering info from your various M&A clients, and you're providing admin support to senior bankers. That admin support can be everything to reviewing emails, to getting coffee, to picking up their dry cleaning, etc. Investment banking has the longest hours within the professional services sectors within the United States. That is 80 to 100 hours a week, including weekends. So it is generally very common for you to work what's called generally banker's hours, which technically start later, around somewhere between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. And run until 3 or 4 a.m. And that's not a misspeak. It is till 3 or 4 a.m. Then you go back and sleep for anywhere from 4 to 6 hours, and then you start the process all over again. At least 6 days a week, if not 7 days a week. That is one reason why particularly the large investment banks in New York, they have sort of intern housing or analyst housing that's provided within FIDI, within the financial district, so that you can walk a couple blocks to your apartment to sleep for a few hours before coming back to work. for along with those long hours is the highest, what I would call top line year one salary. So this is when you have graduated, you've gotten a full-time job with the firm as an investment banker. You're generally looking at $100,000 base plus a performance bonus of anywhere from 10 to 50K. So in terms of top line, what you see in your series of paychecks at the end of the year is somewhere between 110 to 150,000. Now, while that is a huge amount of money, it is important to distinguish that, the top line number, from your bottom line number. That means what you have to pay, what are your expenses in terms of housing, clothing, food, and entertainment. So particularly for roles in New York, particularly investment banking, the vast majority of your money will go out during those first few years to pay for the lifestyle of investment banking. So that's what I call here these out-of-pocket lifestyle expenses. Those are more or less required networking events with senior bankers who make much more money than you, but you're expected often to front the money for purchasing alcohol, food, entertainment, etc. Those are really core and built into particularly the investment banking culture. Now, if that's something that you don't feel comfortable doing, we can meet and have one-on-one discussions of how to still be able to build out your professional network within investment banking without getting into that full, very expensive lifestyle that comes with investment banking. But it is important to note that that is a very core part, particularly of the first few years within the investment banking realm. So as a personal example, so when I graduated from Georgetown, I went and worked for the government in Las Vegas, Nevada, because it was the Air Force and that was a random place to be. So I made like 35K my first year out of Georgetown. A bunch of my friends went into investment banking in New York and made, at that time, 100 to 110K, including bonuses. At the end of year one, many of them had $5,000 to $10,000 worth of savings, versus I had $15,000 to $20,000 worth of savings, not because I managed my money any better, but because of the lower cost of living and the lower lifestyle expenses being paid out of my salary compared to them having to keep up with that broader cost of investment banking lifestyle. So it's easy to get sort of seduced by the idea that you can just make huge amounts of money in investment banking and you can save it all away to pay for business school or law school, what have you. But that's not really true, because most of that money will be going out within your first few years. And it's not until you get to year 3, 4, or 5 where you will start increasing your salary enough that you'll actually be able to save a fair amount of money. Now, because all of that, the majority of people that go into investment banking, so that means you've successfully gotten an internship, you've successfully converted that internship into a full-time role, and you've successfully done the first few years in that full-time role in investment banking, the vast majority of those people burn out after those 2 to 3 years. Really, the human body isn't meant to work hundreds of hours every 100-hour weeks doing very specific quantitative analysis with very little sleep continually. So the majority burn out, but they have the broadest job prospects throughout both finance and business sectors. Somebody have a question? Maybe somebody's just not on mute. Okay. So that is sort of investment banking is a nutshell, which is high top line salary, a lot of personal costs in terms of hours, stress, and a lot of literal expenses. So if you are interested in investment banking, you have to really, really be interested in it and be willing to go through all of that for at least the next really 4 years, if you count both the internship and then subsequent 2 to 3 years of working full time to then be able to get into a position where some of that calms down a little bit, though that sort of high lifestyle continues throughout an investment banking career. In sales and trading, someone had asked what's the best way to get internships within sales and trading. A number of firms will offer direct internships with their sales or trading departments. If not, you can also apply for roles in asset management and then go from there into sales and trading. Will this presentation be made available after? Yes, it will. I will send out to everybody. For sales and trading, you're focused more on communicating with various customers, you're administratively processing trades, you're building and presenting market strategies to clients and leadership. So it is more on the day-to-day transactions rather than sort of broader M&A planning and modeling. The workload is a lot less, 60 to 70 hours a week. Rarely does include weekend work. It is lower in theory base level, so 85K is the general average compared to 100K, but with large performance bonuses, which means even at a top line level, you may be making more in sales and trading than you are in investment banking. And while still relatively high lifestyle costs, much less so than investment banking, and lead to a lot of opportunities within the bank, as well as other large businesses in consulting, private equity, venture capital, etc. Asset management is often given, I think, short shrift, particularly in like the Georgetown sphere of thinking about opportunities in finance, but really can be a good launch pad for a finance career while avoiding some of the extremities of investment banking. So when you're an asset manager, you're monitoring changes in performance, you're engaging with clients, you're identifying opportunities to increase yields and returns. You're doing actually a fair amount more of the sort of substantive analysis in asset management than you would in sales and trading, and is roughly comparable to sort of quantitative analysis you'll be doing in investment banking. While the hours vary widely by firms, you can generally see anywhere from 50 to 90 hour weeks, with 70 to 80K in terms of year one salary. So that's roughly equivalent to what you would make as a year one consultant at a large firm, with bonus depending on what firm and specific account you're on. But similarly, lower top line numbers, but higher bottom line numbers, just because of the less sort of out-of-pocket expenses you're expected to front in the professional networking portions. And lots of opportunities in private equity, venture capital, buy side, large businesses, and consulting. And then finally, the roles that you will see a lot of are equity research. There tends to be a sense that, oh, well, I don't want to just research things. I want to really be out there and networking and engaging with investors and clients and bankers. Really, you are doing research across all of these roles. It just depends on exactly what you're doing with that research. So equity researchers, they analyze groups of stocks, securities, assets. They're developing prospectus reports. It is more ancillary than, say, the sales and trading or investment banking realms, where you're supporting a lot of communication with clients. In the equity research realm, you're more supporting the bankers who are then engaging with the clients. 60-hour weeks is the norm, jumping up to 80 hours a week during earnings season at the end of each quarter. Generally 90K in terms of base, so higher than asset management, but not really many bonuses. The most folks, equity research is usually an early career activity. So it's something many people use to jump into broader financial core services to then be able to move to other places within the bank. And so you're looking at all this and you say, I definitely want a financial services internship. What is the process? So really 8 major steps. Thing 1, research and discern among subsectors and firms. You can't go into an interview or discussion with a firm and just generally say you're interested in finance. Nor can you say you're generally interested in their firm. I'm applying for Citibank and I'm generally interested in Citibank. Why are you interested in the specific division and the specific role at the specific firm you are applying for? So the more you can research that and really hone your questions and your interest level, the more likely you are to proceed through the process with the company. And at the end of this presentation, and which again I'll send out to everyone, a list of resources in terms of how to do that research. 2, and many of you may have already begun doing this, which is networking with alumni at firms of interest. This is very, very important within the financial services realm because there are so many more applicants than there are open positions. The optimum thing you want to do is connect with preferably an alumni or really anyone that is at a firm that you're interested in applying for. Really, the more senior person, the better, but lacking anything else, just an employee within the firm that you're interested in applying to. Being able to understand from them more information about the firm, what they're looking for, what their experiences have been, whether they liked, what have they disliked, being able to incorporate that information into your application and into your interviewing with the firm. And most importantly, really what you're trying to get to is to get that person to effectively be a reference or referral for you to their own recruiters. So if I have reached out to somebody at Morgan Stanley, we've connected, I've talked with them on the phone a couple times, I eventually am building up to, would you be willing to serve as a referral to me? I'm applying for this Morgan Stanley internship in their equity research role within the broader private equity space. And they say, sure, absolutely. I feel like we've connected over those last few calls. I will send it. The Morgan Stanley person, I'm going to send an email to my recruiter. So that's the Morgan Stanley recruiter that is working and supporting the recruiting for Georgetown or at Georgetown. And I'm going to say that this person absolutely needs to get an actual interview. Don't just leave their resume or application on the table. So really, you're trying to network in order to gain more information about the firm, but also that serves to get your foot in the door in order to pull your resume from the broader pool of people who have all submitted their resumes into the smaller pool of people that will then actually get a screening interview, which is coming up in step 6. Step 3, attend firm info sessions. Those will start this Thursday with the Financial Services Networking Night, which will be virtual. A number of different firms will be there from across the different sizes of firms, types of divisions, types of roles, and you will see on Handshake info sessions throughout the month of February and going into March. It is absolutely necessary for you to attend the info session, if at all possible, for the firms you are interested in applying for. Some applications will only be made available to students that attend the info session with the firm. So you want to attend the info session not only to get the literal information, but also to network specifically with the recruiters from that firm. So you want to use those opportunities to talk with the recruiter, preferably get their email address and follow up with them afterward. Even if it is just a small thing, and even if every single one of you do it and do reach out to that specific recruiter, there will be a lot of applicants who don't do that. And really anything that makes you differentiated from everybody else that submits applications to them as well is helpful. So we've already started going into step 4. You're networking with the firm reps that you met at info sessions, you're emailing with them, you're getting on calls with them. Then what do? You submit your application. Application usually includes a statement of interests, like a cover letter. Why are you interested in the firm? Why are you a good fit for the firm? Why is the firm a good fit for what you're interested in doing? And what are your sort of greatest hits that make you a good person for this role at this firm? And those can be experiences you've had in clubs, in high school, in class, in maybe other internships and volunteer experiences. What highlights you as someone who would be good at doing this job, in which the firm doesn't have to do a lot of prep work for you to at least begin contributing during your internship stage? So of all those people that submit applications, a smaller set of them will get screening calls. Now, these are done in one of two ways. The traditional way is for a recruiter to call you on the phone and ask you what we call behavioral questions, which are, why are you interested in this company? Why are you interested in this role? What do you think some of your strengths are? What are some of your weaknesses, et cetera? That's the normal way that most companies have done it over the past 15 years. A number of the investment banks, however, over the last few recruiting seasons have switched to use AI-based software. So rather than speaking to a person, you're effectively uploading a series of short videos in response to questions that you are prompted with, and you are then expected to, so you will answer these short questions, you're uploading this video, and then the AI software screens you to determine what it rates as the quality of your response. So what is generally is looking for is the conciseness of the answer, the clearness of the answer, emotiveness, but is very tricky because while it will claim to be non-biased and completely objective, it is obviously based around the exact person that that firm or that company put in as the quote model candidate. So definitely something that we at the Career Center can help you think through and prep for, because this is sort of the new frontier and not necessarily a good frontier in terms of interviewing. One of the best resources you can look at is something called Big Interview, which is a way to practice interviewing and also uses some of these AI-based tools to help get a better sense for those firms that do AI-based screening interviews. So of the people that get screening calls, a further subset of them will get a super day interview. These are usually in person. Obviously, with the pandemic, it will somewhat be firm by firm dependent. But super day is an entire day of interviews. So you will be usually interviewing anywhere from 6 to 10 hours that day. They will include a more in-depth person-to-person behavioral interview. Tell me about a time where you've done quantitative analysis. Tell me about a time where you've led a team. Tell me about sort of a challenging time and what you learned from that, etc. There is then a technical and a quantitative interview, which are sometimes merged, sometimes they are separate. During one of them, you will be mostly required to develop a financial model based on a set of data that they will give to you. Usually, you will be building that financial model in Excel unless you know another data analytics language like Python or R. So it's very important prior to the Super Day interviews to have practiced developing financial models, at least in Excel, given different types of data and being able to determine of the sets of data that they provide to you, what is important information, what do you need to focus on, how do you space your time out to develop the financial model. Because most firms will give you anywhere from 2 to 4 hours to develop the financial model and then present your findings back to the interviewer. The developing of a financial model for all finance positions or just IB. So it was initially focused on IB, but a lot of the other firms have adopted that as well. So if you're interested in banking, it's an absolute necessity to focus on. That is sort of the key part of the interview. Same if you're interested in private equity or venture capital. Less so for sales and trading. but you'll also want to do this for asset management and some firms' equity research roles. So really, for almost all of them, yes, you need to know how to do financial modeling. Role by role will be dependent on what the weighting is of that portion during your overall interview. Folks also ask questions on, are info sessions open to first years? Yes, they are, though most of the actual things will be focused on opportunities for sophomores, but if you're able to make it, it just gives you a leg up in terms of prepping for next year's recruiting if you are a freshman right now. Yes, the vast majority of info sessions are on Handshake. I also send out on a weekly basis a newsletter which has both finance, consulting, and business-related upcoming info sessions, which you can sign up for at the Cawley Career Center website. Yes, there will be. So there will be also a similar session for this for consulting. Consulting really kicks off in the fall. So as we head into particularly coming back for the fall semester in August, there will be a similar session like this, walking through all the pieces of consulting recruiting. So you're on your super day, you've done your behavioral, you've done your quantitative analysis, you've built financial models. There's often also a technical portion, which is what we call in the DoD space, stump the chump questions related to, do you know what this specific type of security is? Do you know what this specific thing on a financial statement means? Walk me through this specific investment type strategy. For other firms, this may also be where they ask you to pitch a stock or an investment, particularly if you're looking at a venture capital firm or various boutique investing firms. So it is not just building the financial model and being able to answer the behavioral questions. It's also being able to go through very specific types of questions related to balance sheet items and the financial sector. And there are resources at the end of this presentation that I'll provide to everyone that will give you opportunities to practice some of those questions. There's a question, is how important is it to have studied finance-related courses before applying to finance internships? And if you're not an MSB student, can you still apply? Absolutely, yes, you can still apply. So I was in the SFS, and a plurality of SFS grads, at least as of class of 2013, and for the most part still accurate, a plurality of them go into finance, including investment banking. Now, being in the MSB, if you are in the MSB already, it would have helped you by giving you access to some of those classes already. But there are many students that have asked me, oh, I'm not in the MSB right now, but I'm a sophomore. Should I shift to the MSB because now I'm applying for finance? That won't align time-wise because you're submitting applications within the next couple months. So if it's something you want to do, you can, but you absolutely do not need to be in the MSB to apply for financial services roles. It will be helpful to have taken at least one or two courses that are financially relevant, but there are a number of courses that are financially relevant that are open to SFS, NHS, and college grads, or rather students. So I've sent out previously a list of some of those courses, and I can provide that list to everyone on this call as well. Also, honestly, even just to get the substantive knowledge, there are a number of free or super low cost courses on things like Coursera, as well as some of the finance recruiting specific websites that can give at least a basic knowledge of some of the core financial modeling and financial statement items that can at least give an initial basic knowledge. So it is if you haven't had any experience with finance from a quantitative perspective yet. Using some of those resources, again, some of them are at the end of this presentation, will definitely be helpful. So you've gone through your super day. Now you get in a subset of the people who got the super day get an internship offer. Now, many of the large firms, that includes a stipend, many of them fairly large. In general, particularly at large firms, there's not much flexibility to negotiate those stipends unless you have multiple internship offers from multiple large firms. Going on Glassdoor is a good place to determine whether or not you're getting a stipend that's in line with what that company generally gives. And if you have specific questions, you can always meet with me or anyone else at the Career Center. Is GPA important when applying to finance interviews? Was the cutoff for a good GPA in finance courses? So, and this is true from finance perspective, consulting from a business perspective, recruiters aren't that concerned with your GPA. So while when you were in high school applying for college, there's so much pressure on your GPA, on your SAT scores, and your ACT scores, et cetera, that is a much lower concern level for the vast majority of recruiters. So firms will have different cutoff levels. Most cut off at about 3.0. So if you're 3.0 or above, you're fine. Particularly if you're at a 3.5 GPA and above, that's like the golden zone. So if you're at a 3.55 or a 3.75 or a 3.95, that really doesn't matter. Like you think it matters because you've gone through like this high school to college process, which was all about grades and clubs and all that sort of thing. Most recruiters don't really concern themselves with that. They concern themselves with what school you attended in terms of university-wide. So like Georgetown is a pretty name brand university that's known for being rigorous. So that gives you a bump up in terms of your application scoring. And they do look at what relevant courses you took that are relevant to finance, but they're not looking at the specific grades you got there in those courses. How long do you have to respond to an offer? So we ask all firms to give students at least 3 weeks to respond. Now, not all firms do that. Some firms increasingly try to push people to respond pretty immediately. And if you have any issues with that, you can let me or anyone else at the Cawley Center know, and we can help you navigate that a little bit. Sometimes it takes some finesse to make sure they give you the due time to consider their internship offers. Where can we sign up for the weekly newsletter from the Cawley Center? You can go on the Cawley Center website to newsletters, then to industry guides, and I will walk this through once we wrap up the presentation, which we only have a couple more slides on. But it is on the Cawley Center website under the newsletter tab, which leads us into what are interpersonal resources. Somebody asked, any advice for networking? So what are the different resources? So in terms of what you can get from the Georgetown Cawley Career Education Center, we have one-on-one advising. So like I said, I'm the industry advisor for finance, consulting, and business. So you can meet one-on-one with me via handshake is where I put my appointment calendar, and you can select a time to meet either virtually or in person. We also have a number of peer advisors, which are juniors or seniors that have already gone through this process and can talk you through specifically what their experience was going through it over the last couple of years. We also have drop-in appointments, which are most afternoons during the week. So right now it is 1 to 3 p.m. virtually every day except Friday. But then we'll move to in person as well once classes are back in person. We can help you review your resumes, your cover letters, either via email or during these advising sessions. We can do mock interviews with you. And if you end up having an interview that needs to be on campus, whether that is an in-person interview or you have a virtual interview, but you don't want to try and take it from your dorm room with your roommates and stuff running around, we can help you book specific interview rooms in Levy so you can have privacy when you're doing your interview. So in terms of networking, what's a good way to network? So that's one of the reasons we encourage folks to go to Hoya Gateway. So Hoya Gateway is like LinkedIn, but designed specifically for Georgetown alums. So already you have something in common. They went to Georgetown, you're at Georgetown right now. The more specific you can get in terms of those connections and the more specific questions you have, the better chance you have of successfully being able to network via a cold call method. So that can be as much as, oh, I see you're from, Palo Alto. I'm from Vallejo, also in the Bay Area. And I'm interested in what you're doing. Could you chat with me? Or, oh, I see you have in your profile that used to be in the IRC. I'm in the IRC right now. And I see you're working at JP Morgan. And wondered if you could sort of walk me through what your experience was, what you liked, what you didn't like. Anything that creates that sort of inherent connection or similarity increases your chance of that person responding to you. The good thing is with Hoya Gateway, because alums had to go out of their way to sign up for it, in theory, that means they're more likely to respond than they would to just somebody random on LinkedIn. Worst comes to worst, using LinkedIn, even if the person is not a Georgetown alum, it is sort of a splattergun effect in which you end up having to send out a lot of reach outs to a lot of different people at the same firm in order to get one person to respond back to you to then be able to network with. And networking is very weird. And it's one of those things where they know why you have reached out to them. They know you're eventually trying to get a referral from them. But they also know that there's sort of a dynamics and a sort of required socializing element in which you both know that you're trying to work towards them giving you a referral, but you sort of have to pretend like you're not doing that. You're just trying to understand more about the firm, even though they also know that eventually, if you seem to socially click via the call, that you're eventually going to ask them for a referral. How can I determine which info session I want to spend my time attending, which firms I want to apply to? Good question. So that is sort of that first step, that researching and discerning across firms, is you really will need to decide, okay, here is the set of firms that I want to focus on, or these are the types of roles within different types of firms I'm interested in focusing on. So, for example, if you're really into banking, investment banking, you might choose a few bulge bracket and then some middle market and then maybe some boutique firms. But you cannot go to every info session for every single firm because there just literally isn't enough hours in the day for you between that with class and clubs and all sorts of other stuff. And a lot of the info sessions will overlap in time. So that's where you need to develop sort of a short list of the firms that you're interested in, usually applying around 10-ish firms is good to cover your bases in terms of submitting applications, again, with some diversity within those types of firms. Can attend some of the info sessions due to class. So there will be while the networking night is this Thursday, there will then be follow-on individual info sessions from many of those firms. So it will be looking at the times on Handshake. Some firms offer one-on-one coffee chats, or really virtual Zoom chats, but they still call them coffee chats. Other ones are more group-focused info sessions, or true full networking events That's a little TBD depending on what restrictions look like around the pandemic. But several firms are even working to do networking events virtually rather than in person, with a big thing being able to still talk to a recruiter, ask specific questions. Again, the more specific the question, generally the better, because that helps you stand out from everybody else that's also asking questions. Are there Career Center sessions on how to improve your LinkedIn profile? Yes, there are. So you can also look at those on Handshakes. We have a number coming up over the next couple weeks. Also, if you go on the Cawley Career Center website, which I can show you momentarily, where some of those resources are. One final thing before I show you the website, which is this list of resources, which again, I will send this out to everyone. But finance industry guides are a good initial place to go in terms of being able to look through what are the different subsectors and types of firms. Once you get into some of the more specific, going through number of website resources, Wall Street Prep, Investopedia, Wall Street Oasis, mergers and inquisitions. It's important to note that a fair number of these have sort of their own focus or slant, so it's relevant to look at a couple of them rather than just take a single one of them as totally true, because each of them sort of have a different angle in terms of the advice they give. For the person that asked about LinkedIn profile, there also are a number of auto review tools that you can use whenever. So Big Interview, as I mentioned previously, helps with both behavioral questions for when you eventually will do in-person interviewing, but also helps you practice with some of these AI-enabled video tools. HireVue is the specific software that a lot of firms use for interviews, either the AI-based interviews or virtual person-to-person interviews. So it's worthwhile to practice and get a little bit more familiarity with HireVue before doing it for real during the actual interview session. And then Resume Worded is a good sort of initial place to go. You can upload your resume or your LinkedIn profile, and it'll give you tips in terms of like grammar, wording, formatting. But like I said, in terms of like getting deeper into content, I or other peer advisors are happy to look through those resumes as well. And then finally, in terms of really getting deep into practice, number of ebooks, most of these are available on Amazon for mostly not that much money, like Heard on the Street, it's like $4 on Amazon. Some of these, like you see, investment banking, are more focused on investment banking specifically, but like Heard on the Street is a good general resource for a lot of the technical and quantitative questions that come out in the interview Super Day process. How would you advise freshman students to prepare? Really going through as much of this sort of information as possible and starting to network early. There is somewhat of a first mover advantage in being one of the earlier people to start networking with the individuals that are currently employed by each firm, because a lot of people will be reaching out to them. So the sooner you can begin networking, the better. What happens if you sign up for an info session but don't end up going? That's not a good thing. We have been trying to be more lenient because of all the flux with the pandemic. Pre-pandemic, it was you got I think it was a total of 2 or 3 no-shows before you lost access to all Career Center events. We're trying to be more lenient now with everything with the pandemic. But really, if you RSVP to the event, you really should be going to the event. And if you end up, obviously stuff comes up, family, class, etc., emailing the event organizer, thanking them for their time and declining, or at least canceling your RSVP 24 hours beforehand is really the right etiquette that we're trying to encourage. When will most 2023 summer internship applications open? Some of them are already open. Most of them will open up within the next 2 to 4 weeks. Like I said, some of them will be made available only via handshake, or some of them will be made available only to those that have attended firms info sessions. Others will be open on handshake, regardless of whether you go to the info session. But it is basically near necessary to go to the info session in order to connect with the recruiter, in order to therefore increase your chances of being pulled out of the broader pool of applicants. How important are your clubs and work experiences? This is also a good question. So clubs can be helpful if they are substantively relevant and if you were deeply involved in developing programs for that club. So I know Georgetown, we're really big into pre-professional and paraprofessional organizations. There are like triple or quadruple the number of ones since I was a student now. But it's important to remember that those are just clubs. They are not actual internship experiences. So it can help you begin to think through some of these skills. If it is a club that also provides, say, like pro bono services to different organizations, what is important is that providing the pro bono support to that organization, not necessarily the club that was the vehicle to do that. So really, in all of that, you want to highlight either the sort of leadership experience you've had in sort of setting up those organizations, planning events, because that really highlights the being able to work as part of a team of diverse individuals to set up something, which is a core skill in almost any sector, but including especially in finance. Otherwise, what you're really using those for are to build networking opportunities, and or if you're providing actual analysis in support of either companies or institutions, highlighting that piece of the experience, really substantive part, rather than just being a general member of the club. Where can you find internship info session for firms you're interested in? All on Handshake. Handshake, and it's worthwhile, particularly as you develop that short list of firms you're interested in, to directly go to their websites, because sometimes there's a disconnect between the company's website and the recruiter that they have post on Handshake. So it's helpful to double check against the company's actual website. Summer internship the next summer. So nothing wrong if you've been focusing more on this summer's internship than next summer's. Finance recruiting is only beginning now. And if you're not super interested in finance and just want to focus on something non-finance related for this summer, that's totally fine. If you do want to have the option potentially to work in the financial services sector as a full-time role after graduation, you really will, though, have to work towards going through the internship recruiting process over the next few months for the subsequent summer of 2023 internships within the financial services sector. And so with that, I know I went over by 15-ish minutes. Just a final note, and then as promised, I will also show you all that are still on the Cawley Career website locations. But you can reach out to me as the industry advisor, Patrick and Anea, who's our coordinator for logistics, events, etc. So if you need to book interview rooms, if you're having any issues signing up for Handshake, you can contact either one of us. Rebecca Cassidy is our broader director of employer relations, so she owns relationships with different firms that recruit at Georgetown. So if you're having an issue with any specific firms, we can incorporate her as well if there's sort of a broader issue, particularly if, for example, they're not giving you the amount of time we've requested that they all give in order to consider internship and job offers. And then finally, the general Hoya Gateway link, which you can also find via the Cawley Career Center website, which I will show you right now. And again, I will send this presentation out to everybody as well as the recording. So one moment, please, and I will show you the Cawley Career Center website so you know where your one-stop shop is to find various resources and information. So Cawley Career Education Center website, few things important of note. So in terms of specifically the newsletter, newsletters, click, industry email newsletter, click, fill out your net ID, your name, and you click here for business, finance, and consulting. Now, if you have already signed up for one newsletter, either the general newsletter or a newsletter for, say, pre-law or tech and analytics, you sometimes will get a error like this where it says, wait, you're already subscribed. When that happens, make sure to click here to update your profile. It is a weird thing with our newsletter distribution system, which is called MailChimp, which has some good things, but also some not good things. And so if you receive this error, doesn't mean you actually are signed up for the newsletter. Just make sure to click here to update your profile.